Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to impartially unpack the highly influential and honestly deeply paradoxical life of Olusegun Obasanjo. This is a man whose personal timeline literally mirrors the turbulent history of modern Nigeria. Even if you know absolutely nothing about Nigerian politics, his story is just a fascinating masterclass in power. You know, how to seize it, how to lose it, and against all odds, how to win it back. We're diving right into the raw facts drawn straight from historical records to understand a figure who has constantly reshaped Africa's most populous nation. Let's get right into it.
So how does a military dictator become a democratic icon? Well, to answer that, we need to examine a leader who embodies what you might call the ultimate political boomerang. It is incredibly rare in history to see someone seize absolute power, surrender it totally voluntarily, lose their freedom entirely, and then, get this, be invited back to rule by the very people they once commanded. To understand how on earth that happened, we've got to look at three completely distinct phases of his life.
The military dictator, the political prisoner, the civilian president. Obasanjo's life is defined by these three starkly contrasting chapters. He went from the absolute dizzying heights of military power all the way down to the depths of a brutal prison cell, and then incredibly, right back up to the highest office in the land as a civilian. It's a journey that totally defies conventional political logic.
Chapter 1. Soldier to military ruler. Born a village boy in Abeokuta in 1937, Obasanjo's rise was seriously rapid. He joins the army in 1958, serves in the Congo, and actually accepts the Biafran surrender to end the Nigerian Civil War in 1970. But the real turning point? That hits in 1976, at just 39 years old. Following the tragic assassination of his predecessor in a failed coup, he reluctantly stepped up to lead the entire nation.
Now, as a sudden and pretty reluctant military ruler, he didn't just sit on his hands. He initiated massive institutional frameworks that literally shaped the nation's future. We're talking about forming the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, setting up a corrupt practice bureau, and introducing the, highly debated Land Use Decree in 1978. He even put Nigeria on the global cultural map by hosting Festac 77. This was a monumental Pan-African arts festival that really brought international eyes to the country.
Chapter 2. The 1979 Democratic Handover. Despite all those big nation-building efforts, his most defining historical moment actually wasn't how he used power, it was how he gave it up. He systematically managed a staged transition from military rule to a civilian democracy. He didn't just drop the mic and walk away, he built the framework. First, he convened a 230-member Constituent Assembly in 1977. Then, they drafted a new constitution with a clear separation of powers. He lifted the ban on political parties, and finally, on October 1, 1979, he officially transferred power to a civilian, President Shehu Shagari.
The crucial point to remember here is that in an era totally dominated by lifelong dictators across the African continent, Obasanjo's voluntary exit was completely unprecedented. It wasn't a forced exit. It was a carefully managed transition. This singular act really cemented his international reputation as a statesman and earned him massive political capital that, as we're going to see, pays off decades later.
Chapter 3. Prisoner to civilian president.
So, retiring to his farm, Obasanjo became a really vocal critic of subsequent regimes as he watched them basically unravel the nation. As he bluntly put it, "I landed in prison because I couldn't keep my mouth shut." Which is a pretty sharp irony for a former military ruler, right? Under General Sani Abacha in 1995, he was accused of involvement in a phantom coup, which was essentially a fabricated plot just to silence him. He was subjected to a secret treason trial by a military tribunal and thrown into a brutal regional prison where he nearly died. He experienced firsthand the sheer tragedy of unchecked military rule.
But history definitely wasn't done with him yet. When General Abacha died in June 1998, Obasanjo was finally released. Stepping out of that prison, he was a transformed man, and he quickly became the absolute perfect unifying figure for the People's Democratic Party. This was a massive new coalition formed to unite the country against military rule. Think about it. He was trusted by traumatized civilians because of his democratic track record, he was respected by a wary military because, he was one of their own, and he was embraced by a very demanding international community. Fast forward to 1999, and he is elected as Nigeria's civilian president.
His election was no accident of circumstance. Analysts actually note it was the direct, delayed reward for the constitutional discipline he showed by walking away 20 years earlier. When Nigeria desperately needed a safe bridge from dictatorship back to democracy, his 1979 handover became his ultimate, undeniable credential.
Chapter 4: Reforms and Controversies.
Now firmly a civilian president, Obasanjo had a massive mandate for change. His administration formed an economic management team to tackle huge structural reforms. And one of their most staggering achievements? Negotiating the eradication of $30 billion of Nigeria's external debt. $30 billion, with 60% of it canceled outright. This was a monumental, game-changing reset for the nation's finances.
And looking at the broader picture, his aggressive policies really modernized the nation. He consolidated a fragile banking industry, vastly liberalized the telecommunications sector, which literally changed how Nigerians connected overnight, and he even launched national space and satellite technology programs. Plus, he established new anti-corruption agencies, specifically aimed at recovering looted national funds from both past and serving officials. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. His tenure was far from universally praised. Reports from the era highlighted failing electricity infrastructure, specifically the widely ridiculed state-owned power authority, unchecked state spending, and severe political infighting among rival factions. Critics forcefully argued that these fierce rivalries strained the very fabric of the Federation, creating a really chaotic environment leading up to his 2003 re-election.
Chapter 5: The Unfinished Legacy.
As his second term neared its end, he found himself totally entangled in his biggest domestic controversy yet. And this juxtaposition reveals a deep, deep paradox at the heart of his story. Back in 1979, he voluntarily hands over military power, cementing his legacy as a democratic pioneer. But jump to 2006, and his supporters are aggressively pushing a constitutional amendment for a third term. The very architect of the 1979 handover was now associated with a highly polarizing effort to alter the Constitution and extend his own presidency. Opponents argued this would heavily destabilize their still fragile democracy. Ultimately, though, the system he helped build pushed back. In May 2006, the Nigerian Senate decisively blocked the third-term amendment bill. They stopped the amendment dead in its tracks, which successfully paved the way for the nation's first-ever civilian-to-civilian transfer of power in 2007. Obasanjo did step down, but man, that third-term saga left a lasting, complicated mark on his reputation.
So today, Obasanjo's legacy remains hotly debated. He is recognized equally for his undeniable achievements and his heavy-handed methods. As the sources show, he successfully rebuilt global respect, but really struggled to maintain domestic trust. He fought grand corruption, yet critics accused him of using those very campaigns for political vindictiveness. He stabilized the military, but occasionally utilized a rigid, uncompromising style of civilian rule. It is for sure a legacy of stark contrasts.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a major lingering question. When you look at the full scope of his life, the voluntary exit, the unjust imprisonment, the massive economic reforms, and that controversial third-term push, how should history judge a leader who both saved and strained his nation's democracy? It's a debate that continues to echo today, reminding us that the true cost and ultimate value of leadership in a complex world is rarely simple. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the sources, and keep asking the big questions.